On December 17, 1938, in a laboratory in Berlin, two German chemists split the uranium atom for the first time in history. Their names were Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann. The theoretical explanation for what they had done was provided by Lise Meitner, an Austrian Jewish physicist who had already fled Germany to escape persecution, working in exile in Stockholm. Germany had discovered nuclear fission. Germany was first. 6 years later, on August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The city was destroyed in a single detonation. 3 days later, a second bomb destroyed Nagasaki. Japan surrendered within days. The most destructive weapon in human history had ended the largest war in human history. The bomb was American. The science was German. Germany had the discovery. They had the physicists. They had the theoretical framework that made the weapon possible. They had a nuclear weapons program that ran from 1939 to 1945, and they never came close to building a bomb. This is the story of how the country that started the nuclear age finished last in the race to weaponize it, and what that cost them. To understand how Germany failed, you first need to understand what Germany started with. Because what Germany started with in 1939 was, by any measure, extraordinary. German physics in the 1930s was the best in the world. Not competitive with the world, the best. German universities dominated Nobel Prize nominations in physics throughout the 1920s and 1930s. The theoretical framework that made nuclear weapons possible, quantum mechanics, relativity, nuclear physics, had been developed largely by German and German-speaking scientists. Werner Heisenberg, who would lead Germany's nuclear program, had developed the uncertainty principle and was one of the founders of quantum mechanics. He received the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1932. He was 31 years old. Otto Hahn, who discovered fission in 1938, was the world's leading radiochemist. His laboratory in the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin was the most advanced nuclear research facility in the world at the time of his discovery. Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, one of Heisenberg's key colleagues, had by 1940 correctly identified that a nuclear reactor using uranium would produce a new element, plutonium, that could also be used to make a bomb. This was an independent theoretical discovery of what American scientists working on the Manhattan Project would confirm experimentally. Paul Hartek, a physical chemist at Hamburg University, wrote a letter to the German Army Weapons Office in April 1939, just months after the fission discovery, explicitly stating that recent developments in nuclear physics would allow the creation of an explosive many orders of magnitude more powerful than conventional explosives. He was describing an atomic bomb. He wrote this letter in April 1939 before Germany had even invaded Poland. Germany knew. Germany knew early. Germany had the people to do it. So what went wrong? Before the war began, Germany had already destroyed a significant portion of its own scientific capacity. The law for the restoration of the professional civil service, passed in April 1933, required the dismissal of Jewish employees from government positions. German universities were government institutions. Their professors were civil servants. The law applied to them. Between 1933 and 1939, approximately 1,600 scholars were dismissed from German universities. Of these, a disproportionate number were physicists and mathematicians, fields where Jewish scientists had been particularly prominent in Germany's academic culture. The names of those who left are a list of the most important physicists of the 20th century. Albert Einstein, already in the United States when Hitler came to power, he never returned. He would later write the letter to President Roosevelt that initiated the Manhattan Project. Leo Szilard, a Hungarian-born physicist who had worked in Berlin, he left for Britain and then America. He had conceived of the nuclear chain reaction in 1933. He co-drafted Einstein's letter to Roosevelt. Edward Teller left Germany in 1933, eventually joined the Manhattan Project, later became the father of the hydrogen bomb. Hans Bethe left Germany in 1933, joined Cornell, then Los Alamos. He headed the theoretical division of the Manhattan Project and later received the Nobel Prize. Lise Meitner provided the theoretical explanation for fission, fled Germany in 1938, worked in exile in Sweden. She never received the Nobel Prize for the discovery she made possible. Enrico Fermi, Italian, not German, but he left Europe for America in 1938 after Italy passed its own racial laws. He built the first nuclear reactor in Chicago in 1942. This is the cohort that built the American bomb. They were not American. Most of them were European refugees, many of them specifically refugees from the racial policies Germany had imposed. Germany had trained them, educated them, given them the scientific foundation they needed, then expelled them, and they went to America and built the weapon that ended the war. The physicist Victor Weisskopf, who worked at Los Alamos, later noted the extraordinary irony. The atomic bomb was, in a real sense, a German invention, conceived by German-trained physicists based on German scientific discoveries built by people Germany had forced out. Germany did run a nuclear weapons program. It was called the Uranverein, the Uranium Club. It began in 1939 and ran until the end of the war. It had access to uranium ore from occupied Czechoslovakia, heavy water from a facility in Norway, and some of Germany's best remaining physicists. It never produced a nuclear weapon. It never produced a working nuclear reactor. By the end of the war, it had not even achieved a sustained nuclear chain reaction, something the Americans accomplished in December 1942. Why not? The answers reveal failures at every level. The first failure was organizational. The German nuclear program was never given the resources or priority of the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project employed approximately 130,000 people and cost $2 billion, equivalent to roughly $30 billion today. It had priority access to the entire American industrial and scientific infrastructure. The Uranverein at its peak employed perhaps a few hundred scientists and had a fraction of those resources. German war production priorities went to proven weapons, tanks, aircraft, submarines, artillery that were already fighting the war. A weapon that might work in years received lower priority than weapons that were working today. The second failure was scientific. Werner Heisenberg, who led the program, made a critical error in his calculations of the critical mass required for a nuclear weapon. He calculated that critical mass was on the order of tons of enriched uranium. The correct answer is approximately 50 kilograms. This error was consequential. If a bomb required tons of material, it was not a practical weapon. If it required 50 kilograms, it was. Heisenberg's miscalculation led German planners to conclude that a nuclear bomb was not achievable within the time frame of the war. Whether this error was genuine or deliberate has been debated for decades. After the war, Heisenberg and his colleagues suggested they had deliberately slowed the program because they did not want to give Hitler a nuclear weapon. Historians who studied the evidence found little proof of organized sabotage and significant evidence of genuine scientific error. The third failure was the heavy water problem. Nuclear reactors require a moderator to slow neutrons. The Germans chose heavy water as their moderator. Heavy water was produced at a single facility, the Vemork hydroelectric plant in Norway. On the night of February 27, 1943, a team of Norwegian commandos, trained in Britain and parachuted into Norway, destroyed the heavy water production facility at Vemork. This operation set back the German reactor program by at least a year. When the Germans rebuilt production capacity, Allied bombing destroyed the facility again. When Germany attempted to ship its remaining heavy water supply to Germany in 1944, Norwegian resistance fighters sank the ferry carrying it on Lake Tinshus. Germany's entire heavy water supply for its nuclear program was at the bottom of a Norwegian lake. The fourth failure was geography. The Manhattan Project was conducted in remote American locations: Oak Ridge in Tennessee, Hanford in Washington, Los Alamos in New Mexico, deliberately chosen to be beyond the reach of any Axis air power. German nuclear facilities were in Germany under Allied strategic bombing that intensified throughout the war. On August 6, 1945, the day the Hiroshima bomb was dropped, 10 of Germany's top nuclear physicists were being held at Farm Hall, a country house in England. They had been captured by Allied forces at the end of the war and brought to Britain for interrogation. The British intelligence service bugged Farm Hall. Every conversation was recorded. When the physicists were told about Hiroshima, their reactions were recorded in extraordinary detail. Heisenberg's initial response was disbelief. He stated that it was not possible. The Americans could not have built an atomic bomb. His reasoning was that if Germany had not been able to build one, neither could anyone else in the time available. Then the reports were confirmed, and the conversations that followed revealed the full extent of what Germany had failed to achieve, and why. Otto Hahn, who had discovered fission and felt personally responsible for everything it had led to, was devastated. He told colleagues that night that he felt as though he were personally responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Heisenberg spent the night after the announcement trying to work out from first principles how the Americans had actually done it. He had been wrong about critical mass. He now worked through the correct calculation for the first time. In the garden of a country house in England, 6 years after Germany's nuclear program had begun. The transcripts, kept secret for decades and finally released in 1992, are one of the most remarkable documents of the war. They show a group of brilliant men confronting the gap between what they believed they had accomplished and what had actually happened. Several of the scientists made comments suggesting they had convinced themselves the bomb was impossible, which made it easier not to pursue it aggressively. Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker said explicitly, "I believe the reason we didn't do it was because all the physicists didn't want to do it on principle. If we had all wanted Germany to win the war, we would have succeeded." Whether that was true or whether it was a post-war rationalization remains one of the most debated questions in the history of science. The contrast with the American program reveals how completely different the two efforts were in scale, priority, and commitment. The Manhattan Project was authorized in 1942 after the United States entered the war. By 1945, it employed 130,000 people across 30 different sites in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. Its budget was $2 billion. It had the full priority of the American war economy. Materials, facilities, personnel, and scientific talent were allocated to it without question. The scientific leadership was drawn largely from European refugees, many of them from Germany. J. Robert Oppenheimer, who directed the Los Alamos Laboratory, was American-born, but his team included Fermi, Beth, Teller, Szilard, Frank, and dozens of other European scientists who had fled fascism. The irony was structural. The weapon was built by the people Germany had expelled, funded by a country Germany was at war with, in facilities Germany's bombers could not reach. Germany's Uran-Verein, by comparison, was never given equivalent priority. At its peak, it employed a few hundred people. It had no dedicated industrial infrastructure. It competed for resources with every other German weapons program. And it was led by scientists working in universities and research institutes that were being bombed. The gap was not primarily intellectual. The Germans who remained in Germany were brilliant. Heisenberg was a genuine genius. Hahn had discovered fission. Weizsäcker had independently conceived of plutonium. The gap was organizational, industrial, and, most devastatingly, the result of Germany's own policies having expelled the scientists who might have closed it. America did not win the nuclear race because American scientists were smarter than German scientists. America won because America gave its scientists 130,000 co-workers, $2 billion, and the entire productive capacity of the world's largest economy. And because Germany had driven away half the scientists it needed to compete. We have now told 5 stories in this series: the Tiger tank, the M1 Garand, the Sturmgewehr 44, the Me-262, and now the bomb Germany never built. 5 weapons, 5 different failures. One consistent lesson: military technology does not win wars by itself. The country that wins is not always the country with the best scientists, the best engineers, or the most revolutionary ideas. It is the country that can translate those ideas into production, deployment, and sustained operational use. At scale, under pressure, across years of industrial warfare. Germany discovered fission. Germany trained the physicists who built the American bomb. Germany conceived of the critical weapon innovations of the 20th century, the assault rifle, the jet fighter, the nuclear weapon, before anyone else. And Germany lost, because having the idea is not enough. Building one prototype is not enough. Proving the concept works is not enough. You need 130,000 workers and $2 billion. You need factories that can't be bombed. You need the scientists you didn't expel. You need a war economy that prioritizes the right program at the right time. Germany had the genius. America had the scale. And scale, as this entire series has shown, was what determined the outcome. Next episode, we step back from individual weapons and look at the entire picture. Why did the most militarily innovative nation in World War II lose to countries that copied, simplified, and mass-produced its ideas? What does that tell us about how wars are actually won? And what does it mean for the conflicts being fought right now? That story, the full picture, is next.